Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big, very interesting little guy right here. This is the WE Knives Wasabi. Oh yeah, that's right. But first off, actually, I want to thank very much my buddy Chris. He's a longtime supporter of the channel and sent this little guy along for me to take a look at before he sold it. So that's really great of him, and thank you very much for that, Chris. Next thing, let's do a size comparison, of course. This guy is not small. Here it is against the Spyderco Delicate. So you can see here it's not small at all. Here it is against the Ontario Rat #1, which is much more in line with the amount of blade, but honestly, it's still longer. This has got a bunch of freaking blade to it. Here it is with the Rat #2. So again, we're looking at something that's non-trivial here. And here it is against the ZT452CF, my token very large knife. And blade-wise, frankly, almost handle-wise, we are looking at a lot of freaking blade here. So, this is a big knife. And a much bigger knife than I anticipated before I took it out of the pocket there. So that's cool. And then finally, on the size, not size comparison, I finished that. But on the overall knife front, this is actually a different designer from WE than I've heard of before. A guy named... And pardon me, I'm trashing the name here, but Rafal Brzezowski, something along those lines. He's an interesting designer. I hadn't heard of him before, but if this is his first effort, then damn. He's doing good work. So anyways, let's go on ahead and talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this particular knife. To start with, on the good side, actually, WE Knives has been making a lot of progress here. I actually feel vaguely bad about it. So WE Knives, not about their progress, I feel great about that, but WE Knives used to do a bunch of things that angered me on a regular basis. They used entirely number-based names, and that bothered me. Now they're using actual names, like Wasabi here. It's great. They used to use stupid star-shaped screws for everything, these external star screws. Watch my old WE Knives reviews, and they were just terrible, and they gave a terrible tool and whatnot, and they made the knives, basically, it was a big, big freaking problem. And they've done away with that. They seem to have seen the light, and I haven't been seeing them on any of their newer models, and frankly, that's just amazing. And so, honestly, WE Knives has done a lot of changes, and I've kind of neglected them just because I've been really freaking busy, but I'm trying to rectify that by picking up, well, for instance, the rectifier, but by looking at a couple of different WE Knives here that have slipped past me in the last few months, and, hopefully we'll take a look. But anyways, so that's a good thing to start with, is that it doesn't have any of WE's classical sins. Next thing, it does have a lot of WE's classical goodness. For instance, the clip is well done. WE tends to do good clips. That's nice. The ergonomics on this guy are actually very nicely done. The only real hot spot from this guy comes from the corner of the clip here, and even then, that's not bad particularly. I mean, you can feel it in there more than maybe some. But honestly, even really gripping down on this guy, I'm not feeling like a strong hot spot off the clip. Pardon me. So that's just a beautiful thing. Next thing, I gotta say, I like this design a lot. Partly because it is not a WE knife in the classical sense. If you didn't have this logo on here, I'm not necessarily sure who I'd think this was by. It's missing the hole, so it can't be a Spyder. I mean, it's a weird little piece. And I'm liking the fact that it's not another WE knife, because WE Knives kind of has a type. And I think, for instance, this is a WE Knives knife. Generally speaking, it's got the neon, anodization, looks kind of like a toy. It's got, inlays. It's got, black and silver and whatnot. This is what I think of when I think WE Knives. This is not, and I really appreciate the fact that there's this diversification of it. Because this is sort of a classical, almost sway-backy, sort of worny blade, but it's just done more modernly. You know what? I think it's well done. It's a nice little design here, with a couple of exceptions we'll talk about later, but it's a nice design, and I love seeing that, so that's good. Next thing, the flipper tab on this, we'll come back to it later, but I do love the fact that there is no pocket pecker here. There is not a flipper tab hanging off the back of that that's going to be pecking on whatever's in your pocket there. This is just very easy, and the tab conceals when the knife is closed, which is a nice thing. They've just done a lot of really good stuff here, and that's, to me at least, really excellent. I'm a big, big fan of that, and the hidden flipper design, well, that's attractive. So, no argument there. Pardon me. Next thing, the manufacturing on this guy, I mean, look, it's a WE knife. WE Knives does well. That's the reason they're becoming so dominant, both in China and, frankly, in the higher-end knife marketing, world overall. There are many, many people using WE Knives for their manufacturing skill, and this is a nice example of it. As you saw in the disassembly video, this is beautifully milled out internally, which is good because that helps the balance be where it kind of needs to be, although it's actually still even a little bit far back, even with all that internal milling. But still, that's a beautiful thing. It's got a non-free spinning pivot that's done with a shelf, and a really nicely done there. The fasteners are well done, internal hidden clip screw. This is really well made, and frankly, in terms of fit and finish, honestly, it's basically perfect, and that's really incredible. I mean, there is a reason, and the tent is great for the action, everything like that. There is a reason that I would say that at this point, WE is probably my favorite Chinese knife maker. Just because of this build quality here. The only thing that was holding them back before were the screws, and now they fixed that. I mean, they're doing such damn good work. And so, honestly, that's great. No matter how much I might complain about, price or other kinds of things, the fact is they're laying down damn near perfection, and that's really great. And then finally, the probably the best of the good, well, that's not the great, we'll get there, is the action on this guy. As you're probably hearing, this has a really, really nice action. The sound of it is just great. It's got a very nice, reliable deployment. The action on it is reasonably fall shutty here. It's not like, oh my god, scary fall shutty, but it's good. Overall, the action on this guy is great, and so if you are a flipping knife and aficionado, you will love this, mostly, and we'll talk about that mostly in a bit here, and I think this is really well done in that way. So to me, all of that is the good, is that the action is great. The manufacturing process on it is great. There's no pocket pecker here, because the hidden flip of design. The design itself is very different from what WE normally does, with some nice touches, like for instance this little notch in here. I don't know what it is. Does it make it a harpoon? But either way, it's a nice design. The ergonomics on it are great, the clip is great, and WE has stopped doing a lot of the things that used to really annoy me when WE Knives did it. And so to me, all of that is the good. The great to me, though, is the blade. This is a good old-fashioned Wharncliffe blade, and I love me a Warnie knife. Wharncliffe blades are really great for a lot of kinds of cuts. For instance, especially drawing cuts, like if you're trying to get into a box and pop it up. These are just really great because the tip is right in line there. It's just, the Wharncliffe blades have a whole lot of good going for them. And so to see a Wharncliffe blade that's done this well is great. But adding in the fact that, for instance, the steel on this guy, as you can just barely see down there, is M390. Adding in the fact that the grind on it is actually quite thin. There almost appears to be a little bit of hollowness to this grind. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's hollow. And it goes to a very, very thin grind behind the edge. I mean, look at the freaking tip on this guy. That is very, very thin on there. And add in the fact that it's a very nice, it's not a particularly aggro Warnie blade. What I mean by that is a lot of the modern knife Wharncliffe blades tend to be very pointy at the front, very, well, frankly, they're going to scare some people. Whereas I think this manages to avoid that in a substantial way. Sure, there are going to be some people scared, especially given the size of the thing, but this is just a really, really nice Wharncliffe blade. A couple of little issues accepted. Well, there is a lot of joy to be found here, and I think a Wharncliffe blade is something that needs to happen more and more often in the world. So, to me at least, that's what's great here, is this has a really nice Wharncliffe blade. On the bad side, to start with, this is completely subjective, but this blade is weirdly huge. We're coming in at 3.8 inches, and when I first saw this guy, I was like, wow, that's great, I'm going to pick one up. And then I saw the size, I was like, okay, wow, that's great. Kevin Cleary's going to pick one up, or something like that. I mean, I digress just because he loves big, big knives. But this is just, this is a little bit big for me. That's taste, but the mini wasabi needs to be a thing. Just like regular wasabi, it's much better in small quantities. Next thing, $300 price here, and look, that's a fair chunk of change. At some level, I think about that price, and I kind of balk a little bit, but at another level, I look at the construction on this guy, and it's like, you know what? Okay, yeah, that's fine. Given the amount of internal milling, given the overall finish, the fact that it is basically perfect and pretty huge at M390 and whatnot, I can't get too bad out of shape about the price. And in fact, I was a little bit torn as to whether even to call it bad. But the thing is, it is not the kind of mathematically implausible value that I think we got started off by delivering. Or it's just like, oh my God, how are you doing? And so, this is, it's value. It's solid, but it's not like, face-meltingly high value there. Not a bad thing necessarily, but it is still going to be a pricey knife, and $300 is out of range for a lot of people. Then finally, on the bad side, unfortunately, although you could choke up on this guy, and you really can, There's no jimping or anything here, and as a result, you are in a surface here where as you're grabbing it, your hand is going to want to slip down towards the blade here into this sharpening choil-ish thing, and you're on it's a downhill slope to danger down there, and that's not something I necessarily like, and as a result, although I could choke up, it doesn't quite land well for me there, and so to me at least that's what's bad here, is that the choking up isn't a great idea because the downhill slope to danger down, the $300 is a fair chunk of change, and it's not the kind of crazy value that we used to have, although it's still pretty solid. And it is weirdly huge, at least by my standards. I want a mini wasabi. Unfortunately, this knife does have some ugly going on here. To start with the choil here, I was just talking about that, but it's kind of unfortunate, but this is a straight edge ruler, but when I put it up against here, what you can see here is that there is a bit of a recurve because they didn't quite bring the sharpening choil out far enough. It's very subtle, but there's just a beard on the end of this blade here because this didn't go far enough out. And as a result, that's going to make this guy harder to work on generalized, flat bench stones. And that's one of the things that a Warney has going for it best. Is they're super easy to sharpen if you've got flat stones. It's just like, whoop, whoop, there you go. And that's really rough on me. I mean, a lot of companies miss the choil by a little tiny amount, but for this not to be a completely flat edge, that's bothersome. Not a big deal, but it's a small enough thing that they could have done right that I'm going to go ahead and call it ugly. On a bigger deal, unfortunately, the flipper tab on this guy, although I love the fact that it's so compact and out of the way, it does kind of suck for one main reason, and that is right here. Take a look at that. They have put a little tiny corner right on the front of the freaking flipper tab, which means that the surface that you press up against with your finger is pointed directly into your finger. Now look, this gives you maybe a little bit of friction, sure. The thing is, it's not a great idea to put a corner where you're expected to pull. There's a reason the door handles are round rather than triangular where you go grab them. It's just a little bit painful each and every time. I get that small tabs are very hard to make right, but the thing is, I think that there are ways to do that a little bit better. And if you even look at like the WE Knives Eschaton, just something about the difference in rounding there made it a little bit, even if they'd done a little jimping or something instead, this just didn't quite land. But unfortunately, it's a source of pain every time I flip the knife, and that's not something I love. And so there's that. And then finally, there is one big ugly issue with that, and you've actually probably been seeing it throughout the video, like wondering why the heck isn't Nick closing this knife normally? Well, unfortunately, this knife is a little bit dangerous to close because, okay, to start with, there are three main ingredients here. First off, this is an action where if I put basically any pressure on this guy, it's going to come flying down and start to close. And so even a little tiny bit of backwards pressure with this finger here, it's very easy to get this guy to close completely. Next thing is that, unfortunately, this is actually not uncommon in the knife world. A number of people will position the flipper tab in such a way that in order for what you want in a perfect world, and I think the ZT452s does this, yeah. So right here, I've got my thumb in this position, and so the blade cannot actually close because the flipper tab hits my thumb. But by the time it hits my thumb, the detent ball is already up onto the blade. And that's kind of the source of the biggest resistance as you're closing a knife, is that initial jump up onto the blade there. But here, I can't actually close this guy on my thumb. Well, I can if I'm not careful. But it's a lot harder to do because my thumb will catch the blade and then I can push it the rest of the way shut. On this guy, unfortunately, because of this tiny little flipper tab, if I try and put my thumb there, there's not much to catch my thumb. I get it, it's a low-profile flipper tab, but even if it's right there, unfortunately, the detent ball is nowhere freaking near the blade. In order for the detent ball to come up onto the blade, it needs to be pushed even further over there. And so once you push it onto the blade, then that puts a fair amount of force in there. But you're in this weird position where, unfortunately, with this smooth action, what you kind of have to do is push this past your thumb. So right now my thumb is just like here and waiting for this guy to come closing onto me. And so it's really a delicate dance to do this guy because the detent also takes a fair amount of force. And if you use too much force, it's going to come flying down onto your thumb that's waiting there for you. That's really just just not great. And so, unfortunately, these two little things, the fact that the flipper tab doesn't stop it on the thumb, there's no detent ramp, and the action is very smooth, makes this guy a little bit dangerous to close in the conventional way here. I found myself, if I'm having to do this one-handed while carrying, I tend to do it on its side because then it won't naturally fall. But this is just kind of a problem for me. It requires a lot of conscious thinking, or more often, see right there. Did you see that? Because I was trying to get this guy up onto the tab, but I used a little too much force, and you saw it start to come down towards my finger. That's scary to me. And so you have a knife here that is just a little bit more dangerous to close than your average frame lock just because of a couple of little tiny mistakes. But those little tiny mistakes, coupled with the flipper tab, coupled with the botched choil, really do add up and make some pretty substantial ugly. And so to me, that's the ugly, is the danger to close thing, the flipper tab being just problematic to use on a regular basis, and then the botched choil was just ugly. Pardon me. Guys, turns out that when you swallow, needs to, long day. But look, this is quite nearly an incredible knife. That's my final conclusion here. This is really, really close to being a gem. The handles on it are just beautiful. The blade is well made. It's a nice design. It's interesting. It's different coming out of WE Knives. And the warty blade here is just great. And the action, the build quality, all of that stuff is just where we want it from WE Knives. And this is WE really flexing a little bit on the knife community, showing that they can do this really, really well. But unfortunately, even as good as it is kind of spoiled by a few big mistakes. The botched finger choil is really, not finger choil, sharpening choil that is spoiling the warniness a little bit and making one of the very best elements of it, that easy sharpenability, not quite so easy. The flipper tab is just not great for using repeatedly, and unfortunately, the closing action, at least to me, is a little bit scary still if you're trying to do it one-handed. And so this is kind of a two-hand closed knife if you're trying to be careful. And so my dominant feeling as I hold this guy, as I manipulate this guy, as I prepared for review, was just kind of along the lines of so close yet so far. I mean, had they not made some of those mistakes, heck, had they even just stuck with if it didn't have the closing thing, then I can live with that flipper tab. I can live... But that to me was just kind of, this could easily have been a gem, but they lost it, and that's really sad. But what this does mean, though, luckily, is that a Wasabi 2, with some of these tweaks, could be absolutely an insta-buy for a lot of people. I think that they could address these issues. And I'm not exactly sure how, because I'm not a knife maker, but I think if they were to reconfigure the geometry in here, maybe just add a really subtle detent ramp. That would be a big thing, and that may be something that you could even do at home. Adding in a detent ramp is not out of line there. But the thing is, I think a Wasabi 2 with those tweaks could be a really incredible piece, and a mini Wasabi 2, I would probably even pick one of those up. But unfortunately, as it stands, although I like the knife substantially, it's just gorgeously made. I think this is a really nice piece, but although it seems like it might spice up your collection a little bit, ultimately, with these issues, I'm afraid that the Wasabi might just leave you feeling burned. So there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you. And that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.